I'm Maya Collins, 33, seated at the defense table in a courthouse that bears my name, fingers rubbing the frayed edge of a navy scarf I've kept since childhood. Across the aisle, Richard and Linda were whispering with their attorney, smiling like lottery winners, already dividing the $5 million they believed was guaranteed. They looked straight through me. They had no idea who I was. Then the bailiff spoke, sharp and formal. All rise for the Honorable Judge Maya Collins. My parents turned, confused, waiting for someone else. Instead, I stood. I walked past their table, climbed the steps, and took my seat behind the bench. The grin on their lawyer's face died instantly. Before I explain how two people abandoned a 5-year-old in an airport and returned decades later to sue her, I need you to judge. If the parents who discarded you like baggage came back for money, drop a guilty or innocent in the comments right now. I want to see where you stand before I tell you what they did. It was 1995, and Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport felt like the loudest place in the world. Terminal C pulsed with noise that climbed up my legs and settled in my chest. Shoes slapped tile, announcements echoed overhead, suitcases rattled like loose bones. Everything was moving fast, rushing somewhere important. I wasn't. I felt fixed in place, like a forgotten marker while the map kept changing around me. I was 5 years old, bundled in a navy scarf that smelled faintly of laundry soap and scratched my chin. It was too long, trailing against the scuffed floor, but I clutched it anyway. It was the only barrier between me and the cold air spilling in every time the sliding doors sighed open. My parents walked several steps ahead. They didn't reach back for my hand. Their shoulders were tight, their pace clipped, eyes darting to watches and departure boards. They didn't look worried. They looked inconvenienced, like people late for something that mattered more than me. My mother glanced over her shoulder, irritation pinching her face. "Hurry up, Maya, you're making us late." They guided me past ticket counters, past families hugging and laughing at gates, deeper into a corner of the terminal most people ignored. Oversized baggage claims sat apart from everything else, a concrete cavern filled with echo and oil-stained air. The carousel groaned as it carried skis, strollers, instrument cases, things too awkward to carry by hand. The smell of jet fuel mixed with burnt coffee lingered in my nose. "Sit here," my father said, pointing to a metal bench bolted into the floor. "Watch the bags. We need to handle something. Don't move." I asked how long. He didn't answer. My mother said, "Count them. Count 500. We'll be back before you're done." Her eyes were already on the exit signs. I sat. I pulled the scarf over my mouth and started counting. 1, 2, a golf bag, a box wrapped in tape. 50, 100. The crowd thinned. The belt's clatter softened into a dull rhythm. 200, 300. My numbers echoed back at me. When I reached 500, the carousel shuddered and stopped. The lights buzzed overhead. Everyone else was gone. That's when I understood something no child should. They weren't delayed. They weren't confused. The calm in their movements hadn't been stress. It had been relief. They left me at baggage claim because that's how they saw me. Too heavy to carry, easier to abandon. The silence closed in. It pressed against my ribs until breathing felt like work. That quiet took my voice with it. For years afterward, I spoke as little as possible, afraid sound would make things worse. It took decades to realize silence could be controlled. Today, when a courtroom stills at my command, I own it. But back then, in that terminal, the silence owned me, and it told me I didn't matter. That lesson followed me everywhere, shaping every decision, every verdict, every breath afterward. I don't know how long I stayed sitting there after the carousel stopped. Time didn't move normally anymore. It stretched, folded, went quiet. The airport kept breathing around me, but farther away now, like I'd sunk underwater. Eventually, motion returned. A security officer glided past on a small electric cart, slowed, then stopped completely. He turned his head, squinting, as if his brain hadn't caught up with what his eyes were seeing. A child, alone, too still. Before he could speak, someone stepped out from behind a concrete pillar near the wall. I hadn't noticed him before. I would later realize he'd been there for a while, watching, waiting to see if anyone would come back for me. He was tall, slightly stooped, wearing a gray suit that looked older than it should have been. His shoes were scuffed, his glasses sat crooked on his nose. He didn't look dramatic, he didn't look dangerous, he looked ordinary in a way that felt safe. "She's not unaccompanied," the guard said automatically, hand lifting toward his radio. "I'll need to call this in." "No," the man said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue, but the word landed with weight, like a door closing. The guard hesitated. The man walked forward and knelt down in front of me, lowering himself until we were eye level. He didn't touch me. He didn't smile. He just looked at me like I was real. "My name is Daniel," he said. I saw them walk away. Something loosened in my chest. He didn't say they were coming back. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He told me the truth, and that mattered more than comfort. In that moment, he saved me from the lie I was trying to build in my own head. The guard backed off, confusion flickering across his face, but he didn't leave. Airport police arrived soon after, then paperwork, then questions. Daniel stayed through all of it. He stayed when social services arrived, he stayed when they decided I would be placed temporarily, and then he stayed when temporary quietly became permanent. He never tried to replace my parents, he never spoke badly about them, he simply existed, steady and unremarkable, like gravity. He showed up to school conferences, he packed lunches badly, he taught me how to sit with silence without being afraid of it. He never once called me lucky. He called me his responsibility. Daniel died on a Wednesday morning, quietly, the same way he lived. No long illness, no warning, just absence. The service was small, too small for the impact he'd had. A handful of people from charities I didn't know he supported filled the pews. I sat in the front row, the old scarf folded in my lap, and felt that familiar silence settle around me again. After the funeral came the will. I expected modest things, the house, maybe a savings account. Instead, the attorney slid a thick folder across the table, page after page, numbers that didn't feel real. Daniel hadn't just been a retired consultant, he'd been an early investor. Quiet, careful, patient. He'd lived simply so he could give freely. The final total sat at the bottom of the page like a verdict. $5 million. The headline appeared 2 days later. Local judge inherits secret fortune. It was the kind of attention I had spent my life avoiding. It took less than 48 hours for the knock to come. Not a phone call, a knock. A process server stood on my porch. Fraud, estate theft, unlawful custody. The plaintiffs were my parents. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask to see me. They sued. I sat at my kitchen table reading the complaint, recognizing the structure immediately. Emotional language, strategic omissions, manufactured grief. It wasn't written to tell the truth. It was written to extract value. And suddenly, everything became clear. When I was 5, I had been a liability, something heavy, something inconvenient. Now, decades later, I had become an asset, and they had come to collect. I didn't call them, I didn't scream, I didn't ask why. That's what a daughter might have done. I wasn't operating as a daughter anymore. I was operating the way I had trained myself to operate for years. I shifted into chambers mode. I read their filing again, this time without emotion, the way I would read any other complaint. Strip the adjectives, ignore the performance, follow the incentives. The story they told was elaborate, painstaking, crafted to sound organic. According to them, they had been loving parents destroyed by tragedy, their child stolen in a chaotic airport, their lives frozen in permanent grief. Daniel was painted as a predator, a manipulator, a man who had orchestrated a decades-long deception. They wanted the estate, damages for emotional suffering, and title to the house. It was bold. It was greedy. It was sloppy. Because grief that real doesn't come with invoices. I set the papers down and walked to the mirror. I studied my face the way I studied defendants before sentencing. I saw the child who counted baggage. I saw the woman who had put people in prison for far less calculated cruelty. This wasn't a family dispute. This was fraud with better lighting. I made one call. Her name was Rebecca Sloan, the best forensic accountant in the state, the kind of person who could follow a dollar through decades of shell companies and bad decisions. When she answered, I didn't explain my childhood. I didn't tell her how much it hurt. I gave her one instruction. Go back to 1995, I said. Find everything. She didn't ask why. People like her never do. For 3 days, my dining room turned into an evidence bunker. Bank statements, property records, old lawsuits pulled from archives that smelled like dust and neglect. People like to think the past disappears. It doesn't. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to dig. On the 4th night, Rebecca froze mid-scroll. Here, she said. I leaned over her shoulder. A civil docket from nearly 30 years ago, my parents versus an airline, filed less than a year after I disappeared. The complaint alleged negligence, emotional distress, loss of a minor child. They hadn't just walked away from me. They'd monetized the disappearance. We pulled the full file. The complaint read like fiction. According to their sworn statement, they had responsibly entrusted me to airline staff for an unaccompanied flight. According to them, I vanished due to gross incompetence. No mention of baggage claim, no mention of counting, no mention of walking away. It was believable. Back then, there were no cameras everywhere, no digital trails, just paper and trust. The airline had settled. Out of court. $450,000. In 1995. Enough to erase debt, enough to start over, enough to buy silence. But the settlement wasn't the worst part. The affidavit was. To receive payment, my parents had signed a sworn declaration. It was clinical, legal, cold. They acknowledged that their daughter was presumed deceased. Presumed dead. I read it twice, 3 times. I waited for my hands to shake. They didn't. Something inside me went still, calm in a way that frightened me. They hadn't lost me. They'd declared me dead for profit. Rebecca exhaled slowly. They closed the book on you, she said. Legally. I nodded. Which means they can't reopen it. Everything snapped into place. Their lawsuit wasn't desperation. It was recycling. They had sold my absence once. They were trying to sell my existence now. Same asset, new angle. They hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because my market value had changed. I called my attorney. We're not settling, I said. There was a pause, then a smile I could hear through the phone. What did you find? I said. The receipt for my life. Trial preparations moved fast, faster than they expected. They assumed I would panic, that I would negotiate, that I would want this quiet. They miscalculated. Because I wasn't protecting a relationship, I was dismantling a scheme. When opening arguments came, I stayed silent. I let them perform. They cried, they remembered birthdays they never attended, they spoke about hope and loss in empty bedrooms. It was polished, rehearsed, effective. I watched without blinking, because lies always collapse under their own weight. You just have to let them finish building. The trial moved the way storms do. Slow at first, then all at once. Kevin and Laura sat at the plaintiff's table dressed in neutral tones, grief-tailored to fit a courtroom. They looked smaller than they had in my memory. Not weaker, smaller. Like people who had spent years practicing sorrow until it became posture. Laura cried on cue. Not hysterical crying. Controlled. Strategic. The kind that makes juries lean forward. She spoke about birthdays that never came, holidays with one place setting too many. She talked about sleeping with my baby blanket for years. She never mentioned the affidavit. She never mentioned the check. Kevin played the quiet father. Hands folded, eyes damp. He nodded when she spoke, as if reliving a wound instead of rehearsing a script. Together, they painted themselves as victims of a system, of a powerful man who had stolen their child and rewritten history. If I hadn't lived it, I might have believed them. I didn't object. My attorney didn't interrupt. We let the narrative rise uninterrupted, because lies expand. They always do, and expansion creates pressure. When it was our turn, we didn't call experts. We didn't call psychologists. We called one witness. Defense calls Anna Reed. The gallery shifted. Kevin's head snapped up. Laura's hand tightened around his sleeve. They hadn't prepared for this. Anna walked in slowly, 27 years old, social worker, exhausted eyes, the kind of posture that apologized for existing. She didn't look at them. She looked at me. It was like seeing a version of myself that had stayed. Same cheekbones, same hands, but where I had grown sharp, she had grown heavy, weighted down by things she never chose. She took the oath, sat, breathed. What was it like growing up in your parents' home? My attorney asked. Anna hesitated, not for effect, for courage. It was quiet, she said, but not peaceful. Quiet like a museum. She explained that my absence wasn't mourned. It was curated, preserved, displayed. She grew up in the shadow of a tragedy that paid bills and softened consequences. Whenever money was tight, the story came out. Whenever sympathy was needed, the loss resurfaced. I wasn't a sister. I was leverage. They didn't miss her, Anna said, voice steady now. They used her. Laura stood up. Stop this, she hissed. You don't know what you're saying. The bailiff intervened. Anna didn't flinch. She reached down and placed a small box on the witness stand. Cardboard, old, water-stained. She opened it. Inside were casino receipts. dozens of them. Faded thermal paper from riverboat casinos and backroom betting halls, all dated within days of my disappearance. While police were searching the airport, Anna said, they were gambling. The courtroom went silent. Not shocked silence. Heavy silence. Recognition silence. Kevin stared straight ahead. Laura's face collapsed, not into grief, but into calculation. She knew. She had always known. The story was cracking in real time. I used to think I was the lucky one, the daughter who got to stay, but now I know she escaped. I was the one who was trapped. Her words didn't feel like testimony. They felt like release. My attorney didn't pause. He walked directly to the bench and handed the judge a certified document, yellowed, official, the 1995 settlement affidavit. The judge read it slowly, once, twice. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Kevin and Laura. You accepted compensation for the wrongful death of your child. You signed a sworn declaration that she was deceased. Laura opened her mouth, closed it. Kevin went pale. So either, she continued, you committed fraud then, or you are committing fraud now. There was nowhere left to stand. Their lawyer leaned back, slowly closed his folder, stepped away from the table, a professional recognizing a fire he could not put out. I stood. I didn't ask permission. I walked into the aisle and faced them. You didn't lose me, I said calmly. You sold me. Laura sobbed, real this time. Kevin didn't look up. You declared me dead so you could move on. You cashed me in once. This time you miscalculated. I leaned closer. A ghost can't inherit, but a ghost can testify. The gavel came down. Hard.
The gavel didn't end the silence. It sealed it. The kind of silence that doesn't fade when people breathe again. It sits. It waits. It watches. Case dismissed with prejudice, the judge said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Bailiff, escort the plaintiffs into custody. Laura's knees buckled. Kevin finally looked at me. Not with anger, not with grief, with fear. The pure animal fear of people who realize the story they lived inside has collapsed and left them exposed to daylight. As they were led away, Laura twisted toward me. Please, she whispered, we made mistakes. Mistakes are accidents. This had been strategy. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The law had already answered for me. The courtroom began to empty. Shoes scuffed, benches creaked. The machinery of consequence moved on to its next obligation. I stayed seated, fingers resting on the edge of the table, grounding myself in something solid. Anna approached me slowly. She didn't know what we were to each other now. Sisters, strangers, survivors of the same fire who escaped through different exits. I'm sorry, she said, for everything. You don't owe me an apology, I replied, and I meant it. She nodded. Relief passed over her face like a tide finally pulling back. She had told the truth. That was enough. That was everything. Outside, the sky was flat and gray. The kind of day that doesn't pretend to be beautiful. I preferred it that way. Honesty in weather felt appropriate. Reporters waited. Cameras lifted. Microphones extended like weapons wrapped in foam. Someone shouted my name. Someone asked how it felt to finally get justice. Justice is a word people use when they want symmetry. This wasn't symmetrical. Nothing could give me back the child who counted bags in an empty terminal. Nothing could undo the years of silence that taught me how to disappear in plain sight. But accountability, that I had. I walked past them without speaking. At home, I took the red scarf from its drawer. The wool was softer now, or maybe my hands had changed. I held it for a long time, not in mourning, in acknowledgement. It had kept me warm when no one else did. I placed it back carefully, closed the drawer. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, lights off, city glow slipping through the blinds. For the first time in days, I let myself feel tired. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of fear, the earned fatigue of finality. William had once told me something I didn't understand until now. Closure isn't a door, it's a boundary, he'd said. I had drawn mine. The money was placed into a trust the next morning. Scholarships, legal aid funds, airport child safety programs, places where silence could be interrupted before it became permanent. Not as revenge, as correction. Weeks later, I returned to the courthouse. Same building, same bench, different weight in the air. When the bailiff called the room to order, the silence answered immediately. Not heavy, obedient. I looked out over the courtroom and saw faces waiting for instruction, for fairness, for judgment that did not depend on charm or tears. This was where I belonged. Not as a ghost, not as luggage, as authority. I thought of the child I had been. Small, quiet, counting to stay calm. She didn't need me to avenge her. She needed me to finish the story. I lifted my gavel, and for the first time when the room went silent, it listened.
I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into insurance fraud and perjury. Kevin and Karen started screaming as the officers moved in, but I didn't watch. I turned my back on them just like they had turned their backs on me. Continue. The fallout was absolute. The statute of limitations on the 1995 settlement fraud was a complex legal knot, but the perjury they committed in open court was fresh. They were indicted 3 weeks later. The local news, which had initially run the story of the judge's secret fortune, now ran a very different headline. The parents who sold their child. Their reputation was incinerated. The church cut them off. The neighbors who had brought casseroles for 30 years demanded explanations they couldn't give. They lost their house to legal fees. They were left with nothing. No money, no status, and no daughters. I didn't keep the $5.5 million. William hadn't given it to me to buy a yacht. He had given it to me to build a safety net. I used the money to launch the Baggage Claim Foundation. We provide top-tier legal defense for foster children aging out of the system, ensuring that when the state stops caring, someone else steps in. We make sure no child ever has to stand alone in a terminal wondering if they matter. 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. Across the table, Megan was laughing at something I said. She looked different. The weight was gone from her shoulders. She had quit her job at the agency and come to work for the foundation as our lead social worker. We were building a relationship from scratch, brick by brick, without the rod of our parents' lies between us. I reached for my coffee, and the sleeve of my coat pulled up, revealing the red wool scarf I was wearing. I didn't wear it because I was cold. I wore it because it looked good. It wasn't a shield anymore, it was just a scarf. The coffee shop was noisy, full of clattering cups and chatter, but for a moment I let myself listen to the silence underneath it all. It wasn't the terrifying, lonely silence of the airport. It was the peaceful silence of a closed case. It was the silence of a debt finally paid in full. I looked at Megan. I looked at the work we were doing, and I realized that William was right. I wasn't the girl who was left behind. I was the girl who was caught.